Saudi Arabian Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman says that his country is moving steadily closer to normalizing relations with Israel. Amid a rash of conflicting reports about progress towards Israel-Saudi normalization, MBS totally rejected the notion that the talks had stalled and told Fox News every day brings normalization closer to reality.
Every day we get closer. It seems it's for the first time a real one, serious. We gotta see how it goes.
The Crown Prince emphasized that a normalization would also impact the lives of the Palestinians.
For us, the Palestinian issue is very important. We need to solve that part, and we have a good negotiations continue till now. We gotta see where it will go. We hope that it will reach a place that it will ease the life of the Palestinians and get Israel as a player in Middle East.
Turning to the issues of Iranian nuclearization, MBS warned that if Iran get a nuclear weapon, the Saudis would have to get one too.
When we are concerned of any country getting a nuclear weapon, that's a bad move. If they get one, we have to get one for security reasons and for balancing power in the Middle East, but we don't want to see that.
The remarks by MBS came as the Biden administration presses ahead with an effort to broker historic ties between the two regional powerhouses and Washington's top Middle East allies. The normalization talks are the centerpiece of the complex negotiations that also include discussions of U.S. security guarantees and civilian nuclear help that Riyadh seeks. The long-awaited meeting between U.S. President Joe Biden and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu yielded optimism on the chances for normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia. The two leaders discussed various issues from Iran to Israeli democracy, and Biden even invited Netanyahu to visit the White House before the end of the year. And ILTV's Steve Leibovich has more.
President Biden set a positive tone by extending a White House invitation to Netanyahu as soon as the two leaders sat down to talk.
I hope we'll see each other in Washington by the end of the year here.
Before getting down to business, Biden made clear his decades-long love of Israel.
75 years ago, the first Israeli Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, after declaring independence, used a phrase that I've quoted very often. He said that if the world stands with Israel, the dream of generations will be fulfilled. You've heard me say many times, with a no Israel, we'd have to invent one.
Biden then touched on issues of friction between Washington and Jerusalem and made clear his viewpoints.
Today, we're going to discuss some of the hard issues, and that is upholding democratic values that lie at the heart of our partnership, including checks and balances in our systems, and preserving a path to a negotiated two-state solution, and ensuring that Iran never acquires a nuclear weapon.
The public meeting was followed by private talks. A senior Israeli official downplayed the impact of the overhaul issue on the conversation, saying Israeli normalization with Saudi Arabia had been the focus of the meeting. The issue of Saudi-Israeli normalization also played out in public.
I suffer from oxymoron, Irish optimism. And I think that you look at, if you and I 10 years ago were talking about normalization with Saudi Arabia, and I think we'd look at each other like, who's been drinking what? But we're
good Irish whiskey.
Good Irish whiskey.
I think that under your leadership, Mr. President, we can forge a historic peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And I think such a peace would go a long way, first, to advance the end of the Arab-Israeli conflict, achieve reconciliation between the Islamic world and the Jewish state, and advance a genuine peace between Israel and the Palestinians.
Netanyahu made the Israeli case to confront Iran together.
I appreciate, Mr. President, your continuous commitment to prevent Iran from achieving nuclear weapons capability. I think that's critical. And that shared goal of ours can be best achieved by a credible military threat, crippling sanctions, and supporting the brave men and women of Iran who despise that regime and who are our real partners for a better future.
The public meeting finished on this positive note.
Mr. President, with your leadership, we can make history.
Together.
And joining us now to elaborate on the highly anticipated Bibi-Biden meeting, its outcomes, and of course Saudi-Israel normalization in the background, is founder and president of the Jerusalem-Washington Center, Gidon Israel. Gidon, so it appears that the Saudi Crown Prince and the U.S. President are both pushing for a normalization deal with Israel, but there is this sticky point about concessions to the Palestinians. Is there a potential point for agreement here?
Well, there's a lot of excitement in the air, and justifiably so. Israel has been looking to make peace with the Arab world and the leader of the Arab world, Saudi Arabia, for many, many years. But the Palestinian issue is a serious issue from a few vantage points, and I'll try to explain. First of all, although the Crown Prince has mentioned that the Palestinian issue is important to him, you also hear him talking about Saudi Arabia, his vision for Saudi Arabia for the next few decades, and he believes that Saudi Arabia or the Middle East should be what Europe was for the past few decades, meaning the future Europe of the world. And you ask yourself, when he's talking about the Middle East being Europe and Saudi Arabia leading that Middle East, do you really think he's going to let the Palestinian issue be an obstacle to achieving that goal? So I don't think that the Crown Prince actually cares as much as he says he does about the Palestinian issue. But the Palestinian issue is a big issue for the Americans. Just like supporting Israel has become almost a cornerstone of the Republican Party, supporting the Palestinians has almost become part of the Democratic Party. Now, in the past, it was supporting Israel-Palestinian peace because that's important for Israel, it's important for a future democratic Israel. But now, in the past few years, it has become supporting the Palestinians because the Palestinian issue is important.
Yeah.
So for America, or for the Democratic Party and a Democratic administration, it's important for them that the Palestinian issue be part of the deal, meaning that if Israel is going to normalize ties with Saudi Arabia, that also the Palestinian issue be taken care of.
Gidon, I'd like to ask you a little bit so we can have that in our interview. Details are still few, but what is the shape of this normalization deal? Is it part of an overall strategic agreement for the region, and is Israel fully on board with that notion, really, in points?
So I think it's important to say the thing with Israel being on board, if the Palestinian issue is part of the deal. So while the right-wing parties in Netanyahu's coalition, right of the Likud, Ben-Gvir's party and Smotrich's party, they might say we're not on board with a Palestinian state being formed as a result of a deal. They might leave the coalition and Gantz will come in, but I'm not sure you're going to have enough Likud members who will be willing to support such a deal. And therefore, that is a huge sticking point, and which making it very, very difficult for such a thing to happen. Now, in terms of the agreement that they're talking about, it's also important for Saudi Arabia to be able to enrich some type of uranium, even if it is for civilian purposes. I'm not sure that the Americans are on board with that. It was reported that Netanyahu is trying to convince the Americans, but there are a few things we know, but there are also a lot of things we don't know. And naturally, in such a sensitive type of negotiation on an issue that is very sensitive, there's probably more that we don't know than we do know.
There's still a lot to wait for, that's for sure. Gidon, thank you so much for joining us today. Chatima Tova.
Thank you. Gmar Chatima Tova.
Experience the power of truth with ILTV News. If you're looking for quality content and captivating visuals, join our news community and become an integral part of our team as we embark on a mission to unveil the real Israel, dismantling the web of lies and misinformation that surround reporting on Israel. By subscribing to ILTV News, you will not only have access to the latest updates, but you will also amplify our message, creating a ripple effect that carries the truth far and wide. Subscribe today and help reshape the narrative. Available on the web, Android, and Apple.
Israel's Foreign Minister Eli Cohen and his Emirati counterpart Abdallah bin Zayed held their first ever diplomatic meeting, fostering hopes for increased cooperation and discussing groundbreaking projects In the Middle East, and ILTV's William Sharon reports.
Israel's Foreign Minister Eli Cohen held a significant meeting with his Emirate counterpart, Abdallah bin Zayed, marking their first ever diplomatic encounter. During their encounter, bin Zayed expressed his anticipation of meeting Cohen once again in November, this time at the COP28 climate conference in Dubai. He also acknowledged Israel's expected active participation in the event. In a gesture of goodwill, Cohen extended an invitation to bin Zayed to visit Israel, prompting further diplomatic cooperation. In a post-meeting statement, Cohen emphasized the discussion of groundbreaking projects in the Middle East, particularly focusing on initiatives like land connectivity that are set to positively impact the entire region. Last week, UAE Ambassador to the United States, Yosef El Otaiba, expressed apprehensions about what he termed as Israel's de facto annexation of Judea and Samaria under Netanyahu's government. He suggested that other nations considering normalization with Israel might play a role in addressing this issue. It's worth noting that Abdallah bin Zayed had previously visited Jerusalem a year ago, marking the second anniversary of the signing of the Abraham Accords. He also attended the Negev Summit in Israel in March 2022, alongside counterparts from Bahrain, Morocco, Egypt, and the United States. During that summit, they agreed to establish a forum for discussing regional issues, initiated by former Prime Minister Yair Lapid, although the forum has yet to reconvene.
And with the ongoing but also mounting terror attempts during the Jewish high holidays, Israeli security personnel foiled what could have been a deadly stabbing attack by a Gaza terrorist on Wednesday at the Savidor Central train station in Tel Aviv. And earlier today, a security guard was lightly injured after being run over at the Kalandia crossing. ILTV's Steve Leibovich has the details.
A 35-year-old Palestinian resident of Jabalia in the Hamas-ruled Gaza Strip was apprehended at Tel Aviv's Savidor Central railway station. The man, who possessed an 11.8-inch butcher's knife, was taken into custody on Wednesday. Notably, he held a valid work permit for Israel, as confirmed by police. The terrorist attempted to conceal the knife within a bag while entering the station, but keen-eyed security guards quickly detected his suspicious behavior. Meanwhile, the Shin Bet has revealed that the Hamas was responsible for a recent attempt to smuggle explosives from Gaza into Israel within a shipment of clothing. This smuggling effort took place at the Kerem Shalom crossing, located in the southern corners of Gaza, near the Egyptian border. During a routine security check of goods originating from Gaza, security forces uncovered several pounds of high-quality explosive materials swoon into the lining of internationally recognized fashion brand clothing. These explosives were believed to be destined for use by terrorists within Israel, potentially enabling them to carry out large-scale terror attacks. In a related incident earlier this year, customs inspectors at the Ashdod port seized 16 tons of rocket-making materials, concealed in containers carrying gypsum sacks. These containers, originating from Turkey, were intended to be forwarded to Gaza. Tensions have surged in recent weeks along the Gaza-Israel border due to renewed violent demonstrations and calls for Palestinian terrorist organization leaders for a new intifada. Security remains a top priority in the region amid these developments.
Former Prime Minister Ehud Barak is predicting a possible descent into bloodshed amid ongoing protests against Netanyahu's government judicial reform initiative. Barak was speaking to CBS News while Prime Minister Netanyahu was holding meetings with world leaders in New York. Let's hear a few of his comments.
We will block these attempts on the life of Israel as democracy, and we will win this battle. It might take ups and downs, it might take time. Some people might lose their life along the way. I told the people we will have to face toil and sweat and tears, hopefully no blood, but might be some violence, always comes from the right wing, but we will put an end to it, whatever the price will be. But I'm confident that against all warnings, there will be no civil war in Israel. No way to the Netanyahu doesn't have troops, and he doesn't have the will and the ability or capability to do it. We will win through the most non-violent protest ever.
And joining us now to discuss Barak's latest remarks that we just watched is Alex Trayman, editor of the Jerusalem News Syndicate. Alex, Barak's comments have raised some alarms. Why would the former prime minister be speaking about potential violence and people losing their lives in the protests?
Well, it's not new. In fact, this was a mainstay of protests even before Netanyahu formed this government. During the successive election campaigns, we already started to see the anti-Netanyahu protests developing, and Ehud Barak and others, including opposition leader Yair Lapid, consistently said, and I wrote about this at the time, that these protests are going to lead to violence and even to civil war. So this has been a repeated theme by Ehud Barak and the members of the opposition long before judicial protest was even judicial reform rather was even on the agenda.
That's an interesting angle. Now, some coalition members are saying that Barak should be prosecuted for his remarks. Is that likely to happen?
Oh, that's not likely to happen. And you could suggest that the remarks by the former prime minister are equal to incitement. I mean, all Israeli leaders should want to take the temperature down when we're talking about political issues, about who's going to win an election, about what policies are going to be implemented. And there's no reason why anybody should be talking about a civil war or violence here. You know, living in Jerusalem and speaking to many Israelis about this, I've never met even one Israeli that thinks that the current dispute over judicial reform should lead to any kind of civil violence whatsoever. But there's no chance that Barak will be censured or prosecuted legally in any way.
You know, Barak did say that the protests are non-violent. So what's wrong with him calling for civil disobedience if it remains non-violent, if so?
Well, there's no problem calling for nonviolent civil disobedience. You can question some of the tactics that have been used by the protesters, including illegal tactics like consistently blocking roads during rush hour and other times, blocking the airport. I mean, even the protesters displaying banners on the side, projecting banners onto the side of the UN building and onto Alcatraz, portraying Netanyahu as a criminal. Those are illegal acts. You can't legally project onto the side of the UN building. There's civil disobedience, there's illegal action, and then there's incitement. Nobody's really holding Barak account. But I'll say also that there's another thing which should be considered here is that you had Ehud Barak going on to CBS News as the elected prime minister of the state of Israel was going to New York to speak at the United Nations and to meet with world leaders, including the Secretary General of the UN, including the President of the United States, the Chancellor of Germany, the President of Turkey, and many other nations. And to have a former prime minister coming on to national television in the United States when the prime minister of Israel is going to conduct diplomacy is a red line that had never been crossed before this last term by Netanyahu. You would have never seen Netanyahu do that when he was in the opposition, or any other prime minister or any other opposition member for that matter doing that. So it's definitely a new red line in the campaign to try to remove Netanyahu from office and to delegitimize the current government of the state of Israel.
Alex, you're speaking of the protest against Netanyahu in New York. What's too far? I mean, where does the red line you're speaking about really cross?
Well, again, the Times of Israel had reported that many of the protesters that are in New York to protest against Netanyahu's presence there were flown in from Israel to protest there. So it's not indicative of the true nature of how Israelis in New York feel about the prime minister coming. Even if they disagree with judicial reform, they're not necessarily coming en masse to protest. In fact, to the contrary, there's actually a very large protest rally, rather, in support of Netanyahu that's being arranged tonight. Again, displaying banners on the side of the UN building, which is not legal. So it's there's been harassment also of Israeli ministers when they were abroad, including former Jerusalem mayor and minister of the economy Nir Barkat and Simcha Rothman. They've been harassed and almost attacked violently when they've been abroad. So these are fine lines, I guess, and it's up to the people to decide whether they think that what is in fact one of the most expensive political campaigns in Israeli history to delegitimize the government is crossing the line into beyond civil disobedience and into actions that are both illegal and insightful.
Alex, there's definitely some fine lines here. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
The IDF announced its plans to admit female recruits into elite combat units, responding to calls for gender equality within the military. While critics expressed concerns about national security and lowered requirements, the IDF maintains that this move is driven by practical considerations and not a progressive social agenda. Go girls. The IDF announced its plan to admit female recruits into some of the military's most elite combat units. The move comes as part of a series of pilot programs aimed at expanding combat roles for female soldiers, responding to a High Court of Justice demand for gender equality within the IDF. Starting at the end of 2024, female candidates will have the opportunity to undergo specialized physical and mental assessments, potentially qualifying them for service in the prestigious Sayeret Matkal Commando Unit, a step previously denied to women. In a separate initiative, the IDF plans to open Unit 5515, a combat mobility unit, to female recruits in 2025, provided they pass the necessary screening tests. The establishment of these pilot programs follows the recommendations of an internal committee formed by the IDF in 2020 to evaluate the integration of women into additional combat roles in response to petitions from female recruits seeking access to units previously exclusive to men. Critics also highlight concerns about lowered requirements for female combat soldiers and higher rates of stress injuries among service women. The IDF maintains that its decision to include more women in combat positions is driven by practical considerations, not a progressive social agenda. In Israel, military service is compulsory for men, lasting 2 years and 8 months, while women serve for 2 years, with some units requiring extended service due to lengthy training periods. And now the next step in artificial intelligence applications in Hebrew and Arabic is on the way. The Israel Innovation Authority will invest some 30 million shekels on projects focused on creating and providing access to data and language models. More in this report by Davo Klein.
The Israel Innovation Authority will invest in 17 projects designed to create and provide access to data in both Hebrew and Arabic. IIA CEO Dror Bin said the initiative is crucial in order to promote the integration of artificial intelligence into the Israeli high-tech industry and enable Israeli citizens to benefit from the fruits of this technology. Bin explains that the program is crucial for realizing Israel's unique data potential in Hebrew and Arabic, facilitating the adoption of artificial intelligence in the industry and advancing innovation in Israel. The vision is that the new infrastructures will enable companies to develop products in this field to sell both domestically and internationally. The 17 different projects in industry and academia will have a total budget of 30 million shekels to promote AI applications in Hebrew and Arabic, requiring natural language processing. New solutions and applications in the field of artificial intelligence are emerging almost on a daily basis. However, the gap between existing capabilities for Hebrew and Arabic and more common languages, such as English, is significant. A few examples of the projects include a chat box, a speech-to-text service, a translation algorithm, and bidirectional translation models for Hebrew and Arabic languages. Clalit Health Services will create a large and unique international-level database. These and other projects will reduce existing gaps in the capabilities of Hebrew and Arabic language processing, and some of them even challenge the global state of the art in the field.
Now let's take a look at the weather forecast.